Your journey has been an interesting one up to here. You've questioned so much more than those around you. You've even questioned yourself as to how you could have grown into these thoughts. Am I crazy? When did I begin to think differently? Why do people in general appear so limited in their thought process? Rest assured, you are not alone. The world is slowly waking up to what you already know inside, yet can't quite verbalize. Welcome to the Spiritual Dope Podcast. The show that answers the questions you never even knew to ask, but needed the answers to. Questions about you, this world, the people in it. Most importantly, how do I proceed now moving forward? We don't claim to have all the answers, but we sure do love living in the question. Time for another hit of Spiritual Dope with your host, Brandon Henley. Let's get right into today's episode.
Hey there, Spiritual Dope. I am on today with Derek Webster, who's the lead pastor at Grace Point, a multi-campus church based in Naperville, Illinois. He's also an international teacher and coach. Derek has written 2 books and has 2 podcasts called 7 Minutes on Earth and 128. His company, Win, helps navigate the nexus of faith and culture. He and his wife, Melissa, have 3 children. 2 grandchildren and 1 more grandchild on the way. And I paused there because I was telling him right before we started this conversation how, hey, you look young, you look youthful, you look spry and full of energy, and that's good for you, man. Thanks. Congratulations.
I feel young, youthful, spry, and full of energy.
There you go. Wonderful. So I always like to start these off with the whole idea, right, that we are spiritual conduits, right? We're conduits for God, divine, whatever's kind of coming through us. And the idea is that you and I meeting, connecting today is somewhat like fate, if you will, something like that, something along those lines, part of the grand design, if you will. And there's going to be somebody who's tuned in, listening to this podcast, and there's a message coming through you that only you can deliver at this time, space, and place. What is that message today, Derek?
Yeah. Well, I'm not a Christian fatalist. If, I don't think the math predetermines everything, but I agree. I think this is a moment that was planned before history. And so really, if I can help your listeners grab some confidence and seize their moment in time, I would love to do that. I wrote a book called Your Mess, God's Masterpiece right here. And it's all about the life of Joseph. And here's a guy who goes from obscurity to be the second most powerful person in all of Egypt. And yet, not only is that story remarkable, how in the world does he seize the moment when he's in front of Pharaoh? He goes really from an insecure little brat to that. How do you get there without channeling Donny Osmond and, Joseph in the multicolored dream coat and all of that? But then the second half of his life is all about what happens once you are transformed. So actually more time is spent on him reconciling with his family than is spent even from him going from obscurity to the second in charge. So how do you arrive at a moment where you're in front of a Pharaoh is the first question, because so many of us have a longing for greatness. And then what do you do once you find yourself there? How do you have the confidence to navigate the moment? And in Joseph's life, we see that, confidence is really rooted in humility, but God had to take him on a journey to get to humility, because humility is actually deeply rooted in spirituality. It's rooted in the transcendent.
That's great. I think the idea, I'm not super familiar with the story, right? Yeah. I think you and I talked a little bit about it before, but in terms of this longing for greatness and then having to become, you gain this humility so that you get to that point. What does that look like in a modern, what's a modern likeness to that you would share?
Sure. Well, we celebrate those kinds of stories, right? We celebrate the kinds of stories of people who somehow find their greatness. They find their voice, whether they're a great poet, whether they're a great musician. How does U2 become U2? How does Coldplay become Coldplay? How does Bruce become Bruce? We look at politicians. This afternoon, I was on a bike ride and I was listening to a podcast with Conan O'Brien and President Barack Obama. How does Obama go from obscurity to president? And so we celebrate the arc, the result of that in real time, all the time. We love greatness when it's revealed, but there's something about the journey of that tends to be a mystery. And so what happens is all these biographies are written, and they talk about luck, they talk about talent, they talk about personality, but very few really address what the Bible addresses when it comes to Joseph's life, which is wait, what do you do if you're like in a backwater? You have a longing to be great, but you're born into a broken, blended family like Joseph was. It's highly dysfunctional. Even though he's daddy's favorite, he's also alienated and estranged from his family. He has visions early on that he's so dumb he decides to share them with everybody else because that's really going to help family issues, especially when he tells them how great he's going to be one day. And then they think, well, let's get rid of this guy and let's bring him down to our level. I mean, they dip his dad's, it's because he's his dad's favorite son. And the reason for that is he's born to the wife that he loves. But you have all these other sons in the house. They're all vying for daddy's affection. And so how does Joseph, how do you go from that backwater, Texas, broken blended, how do you do that and then get to second in charge as an Israelite in an Egyptian world? How do you get to those levels of culture and influence? And what the world chalks up, I think, to luck, or many would say, well, it's just luck. Actually, what we read is that there's actually a process to it, which is it's not so much about luck as much as that sometimes God leads you to places that you don't necessarily want to be in order to get you to the places where he wants you. And the design of that is to deflate the ego and to elevate a sense of transcendency so that you have a deep sense of who you are. It's 2 years. So the story of Joseph's kind of interesting. So Joseph, right, 12 brothers. He's got some sisters, gets sold out by his brothers. A caravan of Ishmaelites picks him up, takes him to Egypt, winds up really being a servant in Potiphar's house. Potiphar's the chief of the guard for Pharaoh. Okay, so that's extraordinary, but so what? Well, he's got this character. Suddenly, he already makes an adjustment. He's no longer a brat. He's now on his own. And he's on his own in a foreign language with a foreign tongue. And so he decides, okay, I'm just going to work hard at this. And so when he does, he starts to elevate through the ranks. The challenge is now he has a circumstance out of his control. His wife thinks he's hot. I mean, the text in the Bible actually literally says he was really good looking. He's really smart. He's really good looking. And it's like Brad Pitt in the movie, right? You're just like, oh, gosh, can this guy have anything else? He's unjustly charged, and he goes straight to prison. While he's in prison, and prison in Egyptian culture in the ancient world isn't a pleasant place to be. He's a foreigner. And yet he starts to be noticed for his wisdom and his discernment. Then a baker and a cupbearer. A cupbearer is the guy who tasted for poison for the king. They get sent to prison for political reasons. Joseph's serving the guys in prison. I mean, how low do you have to be to serve the prisoners, right? Like, you think, oh, you have freedom of movement. It's like, in our heads, we're thinking, escape to Alcatraz. He's the guy who does the laundry, right? He's like everywhere. But in the ancient world, it was a little different. And so he's serving the prisoners. They go, we've had these disturbing dreams. Now, remember, he hasn't had dreams since he was a kid. He says, well, what are they? He says, here's what they are. He says, okay, here's what it means. One of you is going to die. The other one's going to make it back. So he predicts all that accurately. And before the cupbearer goes back to Pharaoh, Joseph's last-ditch effort as, see me, I mean something, I'm doing well, I'm here, it's unjust, he says, please remember me. Well, here's the deal. 2 years go by and nothing. Zero. So what's the point? Why is he in prison for 2 years unjustly? What's the divine have to do with that? Well, in that moment, God is saying, I'm going to remove all sense of you thinking how awesome you are in this moment. Because when he stands in front of Pharaoh, when he's finally called up 2 years later, the Pharaoh has disturbing dreams, and the cupbearer goes, I know a guy. He's dressed up as an Egyptian, because that's how you present before the Pharaoh. And Pharaoh goes, hey, here you can interpret dreams. And here's what he says. He says, well, I think you might have heard wrong. He goes, here's the deal. I don't know if I can interpret your dream. I really don't. but I can ask God. And so what we see here is a guy who's different, very different than the early bratty kid who's like walking around the ancient world in a coat of many colors. Not something you want to do if people have a revenge contract out on your family. And so obviously, that story ends well and he becomes second in charge. And then suddenly he's confronted with his family who comes back. They don't recognize him, which is heartbreaking. And he has to navigate this other stuff, but he navigates it as a different person. He's still in charge. He's still like the admirable, but we tend to think, oh, it's the end of the story. Like wrap it up. Like he's made it, right? Cue the credits. But God's going, no, I'm not done here. And so because he has this humility that lends him a confidence, even when his family politics gets a little crazy, he manages to navigate that with great wisdom and discernment. And at the very end of his life, what we find is that his two kids, who are half Egyptian, are actually grafted into God's promise and God's people. So it's like a remarkable thing, and I think it's so modern in so many ways. Now, yeah, we don't have like a nation of Egypt or anything, but look, we got massive pop culture. We have globalization. We have transnationalism. We have streams of influence like never before. And there's a lot of people sitting in their living rooms going, hey, I have a desire. Like, will someone look? And they just don't know, how does this thing work? And the problem most of the time is they're doing so much of this, and so spirituality, God, is really needed, because what happens is it starts to take your focus off of all this and the unjustness of it all, and will they ever see me, and will I ever live my dream? And it begins to say, okay, maybe something else needs to happen. Maybe I need to work on me. Maybe I need to navigate these relationships a little differently. Maybe, there's a flux and a flow, so that God can begin to kind of break you down, so that when you're built up, you're actually the you that you long to be. And that's really the key, right?
Right. So if I'm following,
Yeah.
I mean, the story's awesome, right? I can see kind of the, modern day equivalents in so many different applications, right? Where else can I lay this story over, and it makes sense and I can see it. The part that I would probably touch on mostly is, the humility that comes from spirituality. What do you mean by spirituality to begin
spirituality
with?
is certainly the sense of the transcendent, right? Right. The first question that we all have to ask is, where do we even come up with the notion of God and notion of trying to get back to a God? Is where do we come up with the notion of a transcendent if there's no transcendent? Now, some people are like, well, we made it up to explain the volcano that erupted. And it's like, well, wait a second, we were migratory before we settled under volcanoes. So that doesn't fully explain it. And so here's what the transcendent does for you. The transcendent gives you a sense of place, and it allows you to begin a search for the transcendent personal. Because the minute you start to search for existential meaning, and you start to go, okay, wait a second, is it possible that I'm not at the center of this universe? Right? Because so much of our lives are about us. And we go, maybe there's something bigger even than the world I'm trying to navigate. What happens is our hearts and our experience begin to open us up to possibilities that we actually didn't recognize before. And then we can start saying, okay, is the transcendent impersonal? Is it multi-personal? Is it eminently personal? And of course, if you keep following that down the line, I happen to think it's eminently personal. It's singular. It's a triune God. I think it's the one described in the Bible. But the transcendency begins to give you a sense of place. Years ago, before Angela Merkel became president of Germany, her predecessor was a noted atheist, and he wasn't a bad guy. Nice guy, but when he was sworn in, because he was an atheist, he refused to put his hand on the Bible. And it was kind of a small, minor hubbub in Europe at the time. What bothered people this is what was so interesting about it. What bothered people wasn't so much whether he believed or not in the Bible. That they were like, a lot of people were like, they didn't even believe in that. But it was the sense of, where does his ego stop? if there's no recognition that maybe there's something bigger than me, who is actually at the end of that train?
Yeah, no, that's a good point, right? If you don't have a connection to something greater than yourself, then even if you're serving this community, like, why? What's the purpose behind it?
The community will let you down.
Where does this end?
That's the other thing, right? Look, your own family will let you down. Your kids will let you down.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll go back to, like, the sense of transcendent. You were saying, it sounds like you think it's eminently personable. So, I think that gets me to this idea of the awakening or the transcendent that you have, and I believe somebody says, like, this, your testimony to connection with God, right?
So.
Is that what that boils down to?
Yeah, go ahead.
And that's subjective, right? Like, you can't force somebody else to feel that for you, and somebody else can't feel it as you. So
whoa.
It's totally subjective.
Yes,
so
wholly subjective. No. Okay, yeah. But no, I mean WH, wholly subjective. No, I think it's no, because I think it's a combination of subjective and objective. I'll give you an example. It's subjective that I'm in love with my wife.
Yeah.
Right. But there are objective indications that I'm in love with my wife.
Sure. Right. So what would you call it, to have that experience, right? The transcendent experience, how could you help God?
So it does come from the emptying of yourself. It really does. At some point, you got to take a bet on that something is out there that's bigger than you. And you have to be willing to give yourself up for that. I tell you what the moment was for me. I started kind of really super intellectually trying to figure out if God is alive, is he real, is it made up, is it cultural, is it religious? If God is there, what kind of God are we talking about? He, she, it, spirit. Is all life suffering kind of the Buddhist mantra? Isn't it? Is it like, what are we looking at? And I started kind of whittling my way down mentally, but ultimately I didn't get there mentally. So my mom, my dad was kind of a brain and was really smart, and we would have all those conversations. But my mom was the most joyful. Both my parents had passed. My mom was the most joyful person I ever knew. And she suffered my whole life from a pretty horrific disease. And it's one that would cause, drop most people to their knees. When I was born, she was 5'8". When she died, she was 4'11", one leg, serious suffering. And yet had more, and when you live with someone, you can tell between fakeness and realness. When you see someone in their underwear, it's a little hard to hide. And families are kind of like that. And the challenge with living with my mom was she was genuine, and she had something that I didn't have. And I was healthy and I was angry, and she was sick and she was happy. And I just got ticked, to be honest with you. I got a little bit fresh, and I told her, I said, you believe in Jesus and you believe in God, and look what God did to you. So why would I want to follow that God? And she said, I'll never forget it, because it was one of those kind of zingers, but it was really truthful. And it turned out it was also really insightful. But she said, Derek, I would rather be sick and know Jesus than be healthy like you and not know him. And here was the thing about that. First of all, it's a great comeback line, right? Come on, game over, right? Yeah. Right. But here was the kicker. The kicker was she meant it. So I couldn't wrap my head around, okay, wait a second.
Right.
If someone's making it up to feel good, what, and they had the possibility of being healthy and, whole. I don't get why would you not choose the whole and healthy, right? even if it means losing this imagination construction, this God thing that you've made up, why wouldn't you ditch that for the healthy? And it was the first time I realized, well, wait a second, maybe I don't know it all. Maybe I don't see it all. And maybe there's another reality that exists. And, we talk about, when you're talking about the supernatural, really you're talking about two realities in the same time and space. And most people are like, that's not possible. It's one reality, but it is possible. And the way that I can best describe it is this. Nearly everybody knows what it's like to be lonely in a crowded room, right? But others would say, well, that's not possible. You're in a crowded room. That's the reality. Right. But you're going, yeah, but I'm lonely. Yeah, prove it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm just telling you I'm lonely in a crowded room. And here's the kicker. Which is more powerful? The reality of your loneliness or the reality of the crowded room? And so we know what it is to have realities that coexist in the same space. And so what I did for myself is I just kind of came to the point where I said, okay, if this is real, like if God, if you're there, I'll give you everything to know you. Like I'll give everything. Like if I could say that, I'll give it all. Mm-hmm. And for me, at least, things change dramatically.
Yeah.
So that's how I feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and I mean, that's in line with, I think, a lot of these religions, right? Like, I mean, I say it's just like, once you kind of give yourself wholly over,
it does. The question becomes,
then it opens up for you.
Is it
right?
counted?
Yeah.
Or is it personal? This is why I say I believe in the personal transcendent. And here's what I mean by that. Counted would be if I count my number of prayers every day, if I spin the thing X number of times, if I go and bathe in the river so many times. In other words, what happens is when you reduce the transcendent to a set of, I'll do this in order to gain access to that. The challenge is you're going to get sick one day. You're going to miss the count. And now you have to come up with a system to reconcile that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't count. I don't believe that it's the kind of relationship that's a counting kind of relationship. I think it's a personal relationship. And because of that, I think that there's grace and there are still standards. So for me, there's nothing I can do, right, that's going to somehow magically transform me. I've already tried that. But what I can do is continue to kind of recognize my place in the universe, know that my life is actually owned by someone else. And then what happens is my world actually opens up for me. And so now the transformation part comes as a natural result of ownership and control and me letting go. And so a lot of my process has just been, okay, man, I got to let go of this in me too. Like, this thing's cropped back up.
Describe. So surrender and letting go is something that comes up.
Well, I think the mechanism of it looks different in different areas of my life, because I think most things are character transformations. If you really distill it down, right, you're going from angry to loving, right? Or non-angry or peaceful, and so it's a character transformation. So the question becomes, what's the mechanism? And the answer is, I don't know. It depends on how stubborn I am in that characteristic. Like St. John of the Cross has something called the dark night of the soul. And he talks about how, look, there are some things that have to be drummed out of you by absence. And so you're like, okay, all right, so I got to learn devotion kind of just by deciding. There are other things that I think you relinquish because the transcendent saying, it ain't working for you, right? This is like... Sure.
I think that's a good word, though. I think you threw out a good one there too, if you don't mind me jumping in there. Is devotion, right? So kind of like, would you say outside of this counting the numbers or counting all the prayers and like this whole counting system, that if you just kind of live your life in devotion or in service of, that's how you kind of read it, and that's like that becomes like your
I would go even further. I would say the people you probably admire most in life live their lives in devotion to something or someone bigger than them. Right? And so the people who get closest They're like,
No,
I'm in
fair.
I'm in it for the
Fair.
public service, or I'd love to comedians are great. I'd love to bring joy to people, or, it's not viewed purely in terms of, look at me. And they feel as if they're contributing to something greater. So when you devote yourself, you can devote yourself to the thing, and that's okay. I happen to think that picking the thing can be problematic. For some people, they have a clear call. This is the thing. I'm going to go eradicate cancer in my lifetime. Man, that's a phenomenal. My concern has always been, what if you go after, like, I'm going to eliminate horseshoes on horses, and you never see the car come along, and so you think you're making this big dent, and it's not that. So I have to kind of go, okay, first, I trust the outcome to God. Second, I'm just going to focus on whatever is in front of me. And third, because I'm devoted, the question becomes, does my inner world match the aspiration of this God that I follow? And so thankfully for me, I have a kind of a standard. I have like we have a sacred text in the Bible that kind of helps inform kind of standards and gives some guidance and teachings. That's why I so like the story of Joseph, is because it's like, people tend to look at that and they go, wait, isn't that a musical? Like, isn't that, like, what is that all about? Why is that guy even in there? Is he just there is that story there just to get the Israelites into Egypt so they can get out again by the Red Sea? Is that why it's there? But actually, it's super instructive on, like, what it means to, I would say, not just find God, but really follow God and realize your potential. And that's why I named the book Your Mess, God's Masterpiece. God, I think Joseph has this great line in there. He says, what you designed for evil, God had for good. And God has this ability to take a crooked stick and draw a straight line. And that's good news for me, because I'm like a crooked stick and God can do something with
it. Nah, for sure. And I think that also indicates that, just because what you think this tool or this thing or this action, this place and time and space is designed for, it was actually designed for something else, for greater benefit.
And for your benefit.
For
think about it this way. So ultimately, didn't Joseph become the person he longed to be? Even greater? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's, what's the line? He has ways that we know not of, right? Like, I mean, we're simply not, we don't know. And that's one of the things to me is that well, here we are. We're trying to figure it all out on our own, right? If we can't accept this exterior thing, how can we ever accept this divine grace that's innate for everybody and always there, always available for everybody? And here we are. We're plodding away thinking it's just us. It's going to be a long, cold, hard road, and it's going to be tough. And then, if you can open up to this other space and place like we're talking about here, some other things become possible that you had no idea, as long because you let go of having to be the one.
It's interesting that performance coaches talk about that same thing.
I love it. What you're saying.
So if you look at like performance gurus, they all talk about losing yourself, right? Even the state of flow which is this mental state, being in the zone, is the state of losing yourself. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting to me that for you to be the very best person you have to be, you have to give up some aspect of control and be other focused. It doesn't mean that you don't have free will. It doesn't mean that you can't do great things. It just means that at some point you've got to go, wait, my life isn't about me.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a tough turn sometimes, right? I mean, I'm no stranger to it, and I'm not saying that I've even made the turn wholly myself. But I'm familiar with some of the moves to make that change, right? And so it's definitely interesting, and to do it. I think you touched on it a little bit before. It was like, to do it in this fake manner will never serve you, right? But you got to get there somehow. And I'm always a big fan of when my first podcast was called Father Here for the Rest of Us, right? And I started it I was doing all the right things, but for the wrong reasons, right? And then there was a somewhere in between there that I fell into the right space and place that my audio had to match my video at a certain point in time. It just happened, and ever since then it's just been this road towards how can I be of service and not just to give everything of myself away, but like to be of true service to others greater than myself, and for the betterment
is eminently
of all the
practical
things.
And I think
So,
that people tend to think
awesome,
of it
Derek.
as esoteric, like it's out there and mystical, but it's not. It's practical, right? And it roots you in humility, which gives you confidence and allows you to seize your moment.
Yeah.
Sure.
I love that line. I think that's fantastic. I really do. So real quick for you, spiritual speed dating, right? Like, so somebody listening today is looking to date you, Derek, in the spiritual realm. And I've got 20 questions for every spiritual seeker, and I just kind of pick one at random. And I think this is a good one for you because you're in there and you're working on it. What is the relationship between science and religion?
So most great scientists and most great science, even the scientific method, really emerged from men and women of faith. And the reason was a sense of discovery. The whole idea that says, can I discover it? Can I be known? If I'm looking at the transcendent and I believe, for instance, in God, if God created the universe, then I'm curious about the universe. So how did he create it? And so the scientific method at its best is really a search, or the science in general is at its best is a search for what is true. And the true and the transcendent can go hand in hand. They're not divorced from each other. I think one of the great misnomers is people feel like they have to pick between science or God, and or transcendency, or however you decide to coin that. But I think it's a false dichotomy, and I think it's one that was born out of philosophy and not science.
I know we can go deeper in that, but we don't have too much time. But I think it's a great answer, and I feel like you've answered that one before. So
no, not really. I mean, I get it sometimes.
Does that one come up often to you at all? Like in conversation?
Interesting. I get even this morning I get questions like, how do I know that the prophecies are true? How do I know that I can trust this? I get probably more questions about trust and significance. So whenever science comes up as a question to me, usually it's framed with, how do I know I can trust it or not? But it's not something I deal with every day.
I got you. No, I appreciate that. It was a great answer, and I think that I like the idea. Right, they're complementary. Yeah. You're searching for the truth. What makes us who we are, and what makes things work, and in search for our inner. Yeah. We're looking to see
how do we get an inner.
It shows up.
That's a great
outer,
starting point, right?
Is
Why
there
is there always a shaman?
There, right.
I'm curious. I want to know. Well, thank you.
Right. No, for sure. Derek, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on today. Love kind of what you're putting out there.
Sure.
Where should I send?
One place they can go is winwin.com, WENWYN.com. That's a place that they can go. Another place they can get to is gracepoint.us. So GRACEPOINTE with an E.US. That'll get you to me. But yeah, those are two great spots you can go. You can find me on Facebook or Insta, or you can go to Paraclete Press. I have an author page there. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Brandon.
Awesome, Derek. Thanks so much for being on today.